interesting. Okay, so could you please introduce yourself?
I'm Marian. Punta Gorda people know me as Delores, so it's Marian, Delores, Allen, Redden.
And how are you related to Punta Gorda? What are your memories there?
I was actually born in Punta Gorda, lived there off and on. My dad was a Methodist minister, so we lived a lot of different places, but when they divorced, I eventually moved back to Punta Gorda with my mother.
And what was this time period that you were in Punta Gorda?
Like I say, I was born there, and I actually cannot remember how long we stayed there before we moved to other places, but I was probably 9 when we moved back there permanently. And I was there until I graduated from high school.
So which schools did you go to?
I went to Baker Academy, and then I had to travel to Fort Myers. Well, I went to Baker Academy grades 1 through 6. 7th grade, I went to Dunbar High School in Fort Myers. 8th grade, I came back to Baker Academy, and then 9th grade went back to Dunbar High School.
Why the back and forth?
Because they originally Baker Academy was grades 1 through 6. Then they added 7th and 8th, and because we were already, the 7th graders were already in Fort Myers, they decided to let us finish that year out, and then we came back for 8th grade, and then went back again for 9th grade.
What was that like?
Oh my goodness. Well, it was not good. It was we left home usually around between 6 and 6:30. It was a long day, and then our bus driver was also a teacher, but so she had on her bus clothing when she picked us up, so we had to sit on the bus at her home until she changed into her teacher clothing, and then she drove us on to school. So, but we were a good cohesive group on the bus, so it was okay.
What was Dunbar High like?
It was wonderful. It was the first time I had been in an environment with so many students my own age. Because Punta Gorda, we were very small. I immediately made good friends, and we remained friends for a number of years. Even in our adult life, we have maintained a friendship with some of them, because now we have a reunion, school-wide reunion, every 3 or 4 years. So I still get to see some of my classmates. And we did a 50th anniversary for my class. So many deceased, but and that was fun, seeing people I hadn't seen in all those years.
What were some of the groups you would say you were in? Were you in any clubs or sports activities?
No sports. I was student council. I even ran for student council president, but lost to a very young man. Of course, women weren't, and then I was in what was called the National Honor Society. I was in that. And we were in New Homemakers of America, where we went to different cities to in meetings, and that was fun. That was like a sewing group, okay, and that was pretty much it. I attended sports activities, but I was not a participant.
Who were some of your closest friends at the time?
Oh my goodness. In Punta Gorda, Martha and I became very close, and we still are. We just don't communicate as much as we used to, because we were the 2 tallest, skinniest girls in the group at the time. But we remained friends throughout, and when the schools integrated, Martha and I were chosen to be the first people to integrate the schools. Her mother and my brother were activist in the community up until the time that they both died. But my mother said absolutely not, because she had been reading the papers and seeing the news where all the incidents were occurring all over the United States with integration. So she said absolutely not. Martha's mother was on the fence, but she had an aunt who lived here in Sarasota, so she was able to come to Sarasota and go to high school. So that's when we traveled to Fort Myers to finish high school. She was one of my best friends. I had probably 3 or 4 others in Punta Gorda, but I've lost contact with most of them. My best friends, we had a name. We called ourselves. Oh, I lost it. There were 5 of us. I was gifted in language arts. One girl was gifted in math. One was gifted in history. And we all took Spanish and studied that together. So before school, they'd come to school early, because we would arrive at school very early, and they'd come to school early. So whatever homework we had in any of those classes, we were there to help each other. So,
nice.
Yeah.
What was it like growing up with proximity to like all these activists?
Oh my goodness. Well, being a young girl at that time, I didn't really understand all of it. I knew my brother fought well for a lot of things that people don't even realize in Punta Gorda. He and Martha's mother. But I learned of his activism. I guess I was probably in college when I realized, what he was actually doing. And I used to tease him after I went to school in Jacksonville, Florida. After we moved back to this area, I used to call him and tease him all the time and say, "Oh, have they burned a cross in front of your house yet?" And he would, he'd just laugh it off. So he wasn't worried. He wasn't afraid, because the community, black and white, loved John. He was Mr. Personality. And to me, we didn't use the word goat back then, but he was a goat. He was a goat. And yeah, so I did fear for his life. And after I became an adult, but he never had any fear. He was fearless, just doing what was right.
Was there ever any like incidents or tension during like his activism?
No. The only thing that I remember, a couple of incidences where, I don't even know if it was really aimed at him. Someone tied a noose in one of the offices in Punta Gorda. And I don't remember the whole thing. I have the article somewhere. I have a notebook like that full of articles that were written about John, and I made copies and gave to them. I have 2 sons, and I gave to them so they can share because I've shared a lot of this with them, and I gave them the notebooks so they could share it with their children and grandchildren. So that's the only one that I really remember. He was a ferocious writer too, so he wrote a lot of stories in the newspaper, and stories are written about him also. So,
if you can remember, like what was his love or passion in Punta Gorda?
Just doing what was right. He was the first black mailman. It took him 10 years. He passed the test right away, but it took him another, I believe it's like 10 years before they actually hired him. So, yeah, he was brilliant. So, he had no trouble passing the test, but they weren't ready to hire any African Americans at that time.
So, growing up yourself, when were some of the first times that you like realized like race as a concept?
Oh my goodness. I don't know, because Punta Gorda was so small and compact. My neighbors were white. we played together all the time. So I didn't know, experience a whole lot of segregation. I guess the first thing was, and those water fountains are still downtown. The black and color, and there were times when my mother didn't want to cook, and there was this one cafe downtown that we could go to, but we had to go to the back door to pick up a dinner or something for the two of us, because my brothers had already left home. But like I said, I grew up with white kids as friends, and we remained friends, except when we moved and they moved, so we kind of lost contact with each other. But not a whole lot of prejudice that I see in that little town.
Growing up, what did your mom do in Punta Gorda?
My mother was sickly, but she worked as a cook in the homes of white people, and sometimes she took me with her, and I was allowed to even sit in the dining room and eat. So not with them, but alone. I could sit there and eat alone. So yeah, that's basically what she did. She was a cook. Yeah.
Growing up, did you ever have any jobs in Punta Gorda?
Oh my goodness, just one, and I'll never forget it. I after graduation, after high school, my husband, I'm married, and he had to go to Vietnam, so I went back home and stayed with my mother for a while. And the one job I had, I'll never forget that, is this lady had a bunch of dogs, chihuahuas to be exact. And she wanted me to clean her house, which, I needed some money, so extra money, so. And it got to me when she said to me, "You have to get on your knees and scrub." I said, "No, ma'am, I will not." So I asked my brother to come pick me up, and that was my only job that I had there. So I learned to sew very well. So I made clothing for people. I sewed, and I made money that way also. So
in Punta Gorda, what were some of the social gathering spots that you went to?
Oh, we had two. There's a little one-armed lady who had a little place. We call it Miss Minnie's place. And she had a jukebox in there. And so on Sundays, most of the time, we go there for Sundays or sodas and dance. And the other place was the recreation center, which came much later. And of course, that was a gathering place for us also, on weekends.
What type of gatherings would happen at the recreation center?
We just go there and chat and dance, and sometimes there'd be food, sometimes there wouldn't be, but nothing big, just a group of us getting together and sharing and talking and having fun.
Do you think that these social spots were integrated in Punta Gorda, or were they
No,
black and white?
They were they were all black. I don't know what those kids did on the other side of town, so no, they were all black. I don't think we had any. I don't remember any white kids coming to where we were.
And so you went to Dunbar High, and then did you go to Charlotte High, or?
No,
okay.
That's where Martha and I was supposed to integrate Charlotte High, and that's when our parents stepped in and said no.
In your graduating class, did you feel like that integrated?
No.
Okay.
No, they were graduated in 62. We had 62 African American blacks. Yeah.
And so then, when integration did start happening in Punta Gorda, were you aware of any of that going on?
Oh yeah. My brother kept me informed. Yeah, and of course when I came home from college, I saw it also. But yeah, I got married. My husband and I eloped, so we got married very young. We were 19.
Where'd you get married?
We were both in college in Jacksonville. So there was this little town in Georgia, not just over the line. It was called Folkestone, Georgia. and they didn't ask any questions, didn't ask anything. So they would marry you, and so that's what we did.
Why did you guys decide to get eloped?
He was being called to Vietnam, and so we thought we want to marry before that happened. Yeah. My dad, who was a minister, was a little upset that we didn't ask him to marry us because he had married my sister and one of my brothers. So he was a little upset, but he got over it because he fell in love with my husband. So.
And what did your husband do after the war?
He worked for the state of Florida, Employment Service, and we actually were in Lake City, his hometown, and then he got transferred from that job to Sarasota, and he continued with that. Plus, on the side, he did handyman work to make ends meet, because teachers didn't make a whole lot of money and state employees didn't make a whole lot of money. So he supplemented by doing repairs for homes, and he learned that skill early in life. So yeah.
Growing up in Punta Gorda, do you remember like what the big social events were? Was there something that happened like every year that was a gathering point?
Not that I remember. No. Not for African Americans. No.
And you mentioned like the cross burning like joke, but was there ever any like organized supremacy?
I don't think so. If there were, John never mentioned it to me for fear that I might be more afraid than I already was. So I don't remember anything being done there. Yeah. And he was the most vocal person there. So if it had happened, he probably would have been one of the first to have received that. Yeah.
Being vocal, what were was he involved in like organizations?
He was the first president of the NAACP. And yeah, that was his biggest, and he and his friends, there were like 5 of them who were really, really very active in the community and trying to get things done. Yeah.
And so what type of community action was the NAACP doing at the time?
First, the integration of schools. That was first. And then the workforce, the police force. And they were very successful in getting an African American hired on the police force. Didn't have much to do, but at least he was there. And those were their goals, to just get the community integrated in major, even department stores. He worked in Belk Lindsay for a number of years while he was waiting to be hired at the post office. So yeah, that was pretty much it.
And what was there kind of a tension between like the old timers of Punta Gorda and the people who moved in and expanded?
No. Not that I remember. No.
And what were some of the major industries at the time? Like, where were most people working?
In fields, we had a gladiola farm. We had there were several farms around that they did. My grandfather worked for the railroad, laying what's called that wooden plank that goes across the rails. He worked in setting those up. The big person in Punta Gorda was Mr. Murdoch. He hired a lot of blacks in that town. This Northport was originally named Murdoch, and there's still some areas in Northport where you'll see the Murdoch name. Yeah, so he was instrumental in fact, my grandfather died while at work, working for Mr. Murdoch. Yeah, I don't remember. Of course, a lot of people, ladies, worked as maids, and trying to think what else did they do there. Wasn't a whole lot that I remember.
Do you remember were there any foods that were real local growing up? Or like a shop that had like just the greatest dessert or something like that?
Well, we wouldn't have been able to go there anyway. No, people did their own cooking. My mother, like I said, my mother was a cook, so we had great desserts all the time. She cooked a dessert every week. So we either had cakes or pies every week, and people came by. She didn't even sell them, you know. They'd come by and she'd give it to them, you know, if she made extras. No, nothing. We had Gallman's Bar, and Gallman's had a restaurant also. So we went there. Across the street from Gallman's was Ward's Bar, where my brother also worked part-time. Not much food was, there was they had a little restaurant in the back of the bar. You know, we could go there occasionally, but nothing to, you know, to write home about.
What was the atmosphere like at Gallman's and Ward's?
That was a place where people went to dance and have fun and drink and and whatever. I was never allowed to go there, but my brother actually ran the bar, like I say, at Ward's, and that wasn't a dancing bar. You know, they had the jukebox there. You know, the individuals would dance, but they'd have big dances at Gallman's, and Nathaniel Gallman was also a band leader, so he had his own band, and they traveled, but they basically played in Punta Gorda, and yeah, that was the hangout for the adults.
Would you say that, like, compared to the rest of the country at the time, in your opinion, was like Punta Gorda more insulated? Was it characteristic of the way that race was playing out in the rest of the country?
I think it was just characteristic of what was going on. Yeah.
And when you say you started to see integration happening, like, what were the markers of that for you?
I guess when the schools were integrated. But I wasn't there at the time when most of that happened. I was in Jacksonville and Lake City, so and Lake City again was a very for lack of a better word, country town, but the big industry there was the tobacco industry and the VA hospital, which is where my mother-in-law worked. Pulpwood, which was my father-in-law would work way out in the woods and, you know, cut these huge trees down, and they'd take them to Jacksonville where they went to a paper mill. So those are the biggest. Tobacco was actually the biggest industry there. Lots of vegetable places where you could go pick your own or go and buy peas and greens and all kinds of things like that.
So moving away from Punta Gorda and then, like, coming back after, like, a time period, like, from college, what were, like, the big changes that you noticed?
Not much, because I mean, I never went back to stay very long. I stayed periods of time when my sons were born, but basically then I'd go back to Lake City. My mother, since she didn't have any responsibilities there, she would come up to Lake City and help me out. So, I really didn't. Most of my friends had left, and so I was pretty much a homebody when I was there. I just spent time with my mother.
When you were there during the Vietnam War, how did Punta Gorda kind of respond to the war?
Oh, that I don't know. I don't know that at all, because I was in Jacksonville. I saw somebody come up.
Okay, in Punta Gorda, what do you think was the general experience of race? Like, I know that's a big question, but, like, what was...
I think we were one of the few towns in Florida or anywhere where there was some tension, but basically we were a very little cohesive town, you know. And from what I see when I go there, it still is. Um, they there were little things that my not living there, but my brother, you know, picked up on a lot. So um, yeah, you're right. That's a hard question to answer because I wasn't there enough to pick up on anything. So.
And then my last question is, what do you think is most important to remember about race in Punta Gorda, and then also specifically about John Allen?
Oh, there's so much to ask about John. As I said, he was just the GOAT. I think the education is priority, and just things that John did. I mean, he was, like I said, very vocal, very active until he couldn't be. He was adored by both blacks and whites, loved by both blacks and whites. Loved by his family. You know, he was our hero.
Go ahead.